My name is Sophia Reynolds, and I'm 32 years old. 8 months ago, I sat in a conference room at Business Insider magazine watching my former boss, Trevor Harmon, try to explain to a journalist why his marketing agency had lost 3 major clients in 2 months and why half his staff had resigned. The journalist kept referencing an article I had written exposing how Trevor had stolen credit for my work, fired me to cover his tracks, and built his reputation on campaigns he hadn't created. Trevor's face was red, his voice shaky, and his carefully constructed image as an innovative marketing genius was crumbling in real time. What he didn't know was that I was the anonymous source who had provided the journalist with years of documentation, proving that the $1 million campaign he claimed as his masterpiece was entirely my work. The look on his face when the article published and destroyed his career was the most satisfying moment of my professional life. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next proved that sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what they stole from you and watching their empire collapse while yours rises. But to understand how I got to that moment, sitting in a conference room watching my former boss's reputation destroyed, I need to take you back 9 years and show you how I spent nearly a decade being the unrecognized engine behind someone else's success. I started working at Harmon Creative Agency in Boston right after finishing my master's degree in marketing and communications. I was 23, ambitious, and excited to work at what was then considered one of the more innovative boutique marketing agencies in New England. The agency specialized in digital marketing campaigns for mid-sized companies, and Trevor Harmon, the founder and CEO, had built a reputation as a creative visionary. Trevor was 42 when I started, charismatic and well-connected in the Boston business community. He had founded the agency 10 years earlier and had grown it to about 30 employees with annual revenues of around $5 million. The agency handled everything from social media management to comprehensive brand development for clients in tech, healthcare, and consumer goods. I was hired as a junior marketing coordinator at a salary of $45,000 a year. It wasn't much, but I was grateful for the opportunity to work at an agency with Harmon Creative's reputation. I was assigned to support the senior strategists, handling research, client communications, and execution of campaign elements. From the beginning, I noticed that Trevor had a particular management style. He was very involved in client presentations and high-visibility meetings, but he was rarely involved in the actual work of developing strategies or creating campaigns. That work was done by his team, particularly by the senior strategists who reported directly to him. Trevor's genius, I came to understand, wasn't in creating innovative campaigns. It was in taking credit for other people's work and presenting himself as the creative mind behind everything the agency produced. But in those early years, I didn't fully grasp the extent of this pattern. I was focused on learning, proving myself, and hopefully advancing in my career. I worked hard from day one. I stayed late, volunteered for extra projects, and made myself indispensable to the senior strategists I supported. Within a year, I was handling increasingly complex assignments and developing strong relationships with clients who appreciated my responsiveness and creativity. My direct supervisor was a senior strategist named Julia Chen, who was brilliant at her job, but also aware of Trevor's tendency to take credit for her work. That's just how it is here, Julia told me after one particularly egregious example where Trevor had presented Julia's entire campaign strategy to a client as if he had developed it himself. Trevor is the face of the agency. We do the work, he gets the credit and the clients. That's the trade-off for working at a well-regarded agency. I found this dynamic frustrating, but accepted it as part of working at a small agency where the founder's personal brand was central to the business model. After 2 years at the agency, I was promoted to marketing strategist with a salary increase to $60,000. I was now developing campaigns independently rather than just supporting senior staff, and I was good at it, really good. My campaigns were creative, data-driven, and effective. Clients loved working with me. My strategies consistently delivered results that exceeded expectations. Within another year, I was handling some of the agency's most important accounts. But the pattern Julia had described continued. I would develop a comprehensive campaign strategy, present it to Trevor for approval, and then watch him present that same strategy to the client as if he had created it. My name might be mentioned in passing as someone who had helped execute the campaign, but Trevor positioned himself as the strategic mind behind everything. You have to understand, clients want to work with the agency founder, Trevor explained when I tentatively raised concerns about credit attribution. They're not paying for a junior strategist's ideas. They're paying for my expertise and vision. Your role is to support that vision and help execute it. That's how agencies work. I wanted to believe this was normal, that this was just how the business operated. But it bothered me that my contributions were being systematically minimized while Trevor built his reputation on work I was actually doing. Still, I told myself that my work was being recognized internally, that my career was progressing, and that eventually I would get the credit and opportunities I deserved. I was wrong on all counts. Over the next several years, I continued to excel at my work while watching Trevor take credit for increasingly significant campaigns that I had developed. I saw other talented strategists leave the agency when they realized the same pattern applied to them. The turnover in the strategy department was high, but Trevor always managed to hire new talent eager to work at Harmon Creative despite the toxic credit dynamics. Julia left after 5 years, telling me privately, "I can't watch Trevor present my work as his own anymore. I'm going somewhere that will actually value my contributions." After Julia left, I became one of the most senior strategists at the agency. I was managing major client relationships, mentoring junior staff, and developing the campaigns that kept Harmon Creative competitive. My salary had increased to $75,000, which was still below market rate for someone with my experience and track record. I raised this with Trevor during a performance review. "I've been here for 7 years. I'm managing your most important accounts. I think my compensation should reflect that contribution." Trevor gave me his practiced sympathetic look. "Sophia, I appreciate everything you do, but we're a small agency with tight margins. I can't match what big agencies pay. What I can offer you is the opportunity to work on prestigious campaigns and build your portfolio. That's worth more than a few extra $1,000 in salary." What he didn't mention was that he was paying himself over $300,000 a year while claiming the agency had tight margins. I only learned this later when I saw financial documents that he had accidentally left accessible on the shared server. But at the time, I accepted his explanation and continued working harder than ever, hoping that my dedication would eventually be rewarded. The turning point came about 9 months ago, when I landed what would become the biggest account in Harmon Creative's history. I had been networking at an industry event and had struck up a conversation with the VP of marketing at NexCore Technologies, a rapidly growing software company that was looking for a marketing agency to handle their brand repositioning and launch campaign for a new product line. The budget they were working with was approximately $1.2 million over 18 months, which would make them by far the largest client the agency had ever had. I spent weeks developing a relationship with the NexCore team, understanding their needs and positioning Harmon Creative as the right agency for the project. I developed a preliminary campaign strategy that impressed them and addressed their specific concerns about market positioning and customer acquisition. "We want to work with you specifically," the NexCore VP told me during one of our meetings. "Your understanding of our industry and your strategic approach is exactly what we need." I brought the opportunity to Trevor, excited about landing such a significant client. "This could transform the agency," I told him. "NexCore is a major player, and if we deliver on this campaign, it could open doors to other tech companies." Trevor's eyes lit up when he heard the budget size. "This is excellent work, Sophia. Let's set up a pitch meeting with their team. I'll present our agency capabilities and your preliminary strategy." We scheduled a pitch meeting for 2 weeks later. I spent every available hour developing a comprehensive campaign strategy that would wow the NexCore team. The strategy included a complete brand repositioning, a multi-channel digital marketing campaign, influencer partnerships, content marketing, and a launch event for their new product line. I created detailed mock-ups, projected ROI calculations, and a timeline for execution. It was the best work I had ever done, and I knew it. This was the campaign that would establish me as a top-tier marketing strategist, the project that would finally get me the recognition and compensation I deserved. The day before the pitch meeting, I sent Trevor the complete presentation deck so he could review it, and we could coordinate our presentation. Trevor thanked me and said he would look it over that evening. The next morning, I arrived at the office ready for the pitch meeting. But when I walked into the conference room, Trevor was already there with the NexCore team, and the meeting was clearly well underway. "Sorry, I'm late," I said, confused about the timing. "Oh, Sophia, actually, I rescheduled the meeting to start earlier," Trevor replied smoothly. "I wanted to walk the NexCore team through the strategy at a high level before getting into details. Why don't you sit in and we can discuss execution later?" I sat down, increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Trevor was presenting my strategy deck, the one I had sent him the night before, but he was presenting it as if he had developed it, using phrases like "my approach" and "my strategic vision" and "what I've designed here." The NexCore team was clearly impressed. They asked questions about specific elements of the campaign, and Trevor answered them using the notes and research I had provided in the deck. Occasionally, he would gesture to me and say something like, "Sophia will handle the execution details," or "Sophia can coordinate with your team on implementation." But he never once indicated that I had developed the entire strategy he was presenting. I felt sick watching this happen, but didn't know how to intervene without making a scene in front of the client. So I sat there watching Trevor take credit for months of my work and said nothing. The meeting ended with the NexCore team expressing strong interest in moving forward. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we were hoping for," the VP said to Trevor. "Your vision for our brand is spot on." After the NexCore team left, I confronted Trevor in his office. "You presented my entire strategy as if you had created it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't mention that I developed that campaign, that I've been building the relationship with NexCore, that this entire project came from my networking and my strategy." Trevor looked at me with an expression of mild surprise, as if my concern was unreasonable. "Sophia, I'm the CEO of this agency. When we present to clients, they need to see that the agency's leadership is driving the strategy. That's what they're paying for. You'll get credit internally, and you'll be managing the campaign execution. That should be enough." "But you told them it was your vision, your strategic approach," I protested. "You didn't even acknowledge that I created it." "I reviewed your work and put my own stamp on it," Trevor replied dismissively. "That's my role as CEO. Look, if you want to continue advancing here, you need to understand how client relationships work. The client wants to work with me, with the agency founder. Your job is to support that relationship and execute excellent work. If you're uncomfortable with that dynamic, maybe you're not the right fit for this agency." The implied threat was clear: accept that Trevor would take credit for my work, or leave. I left his office shaking with anger and frustration, but also afraid. I had spent 9 years building my career at this agency. I had relationships with clients. I had a reputation in the Boston marketing community as someone who worked at Harman Creative, and I didn't have the savings or connections to easily start over somewhere else. So I made the decision that I would later regret. I accepted Trevor's terms and focused on executing the NexCore campaign as brilliantly as possible, hoping that somehow my actual contributions would be recognized. Over the next 3 months, I threw myself into the NexCore project. I managed every aspect of the campaign, from creative development to media planning to coordination with external partners. I worked 70-hour weeks, managed a team of junior staff, and delivered results that exceeded even the ambitious goals we had set. The campaign was a massive success. NexCore's new product line launch generated significant media coverage. Their brand perception improved dramatically in market research, and they saw a 40% increase in qualified leads during the campaign period. The client was thrilled, and they immediately wanted to extend the contract and expand the scope of work. I should have been celebrating the biggest success of my career. Instead, I watched Trevor present the campaign results to the NexCore board of directors, taking credit for the entire project and positioning himself as the strategic genius who had transformed their brand. This campaign represents the kind of innovative thinking that Harmon Creative is known for, Trevor told the NexCore board during a presentation I wasn't even invited to attend. My approach combines data-driven strategy with creative storytelling, and the results speak for themselves. I learned about this presentation from one of the junior staff members who had been there to take notes. She told me sympathetically, "It was weird. Trevor kept saying I developed and my strategy, but everyone on the team knows you did all the work. I don't understand why he doesn't give you credit." I didn't understand it either, except that Trevor had built his entire reputation on taking credit for other people's work, and he wasn't about to change that pattern now, even for a campaign this significant. But the betrayal was about to get much worse. 2 weeks after the successful NexCore campaign results were presented, Trevor called me into his office. I thought perhaps he was finally going to acknowledge my contributions or offer me a promotion and raise that reflected my actual value to the agency. Instead, he fired me. "Sophia, I've been evaluating the team structure, and I've made the difficult decision that we need to make some changes," Trevor began, using the rehearsed language of someone who had planned this conversation carefully. "Your position is being eliminated as part of a restructuring. Your last day will be 2 weeks from today." I stared at him in shock. "You're firing me after I just delivered the most successful campaign in this agency's history?" "This isn't about the quality of your work," Trevor replied smoothly. "It's about organizational needs and strategic direction. We're restructuring to create a flatter organization, and your role no longer fits that structure." "That's not true, and you know it," I said, my shock turning to anger. "I manage your most important accounts. I just brought in and executed $1 million project. You're firing me because I questioned you taking credit for my work." "I'm sorry you see it that way," Trevor replied, his tone making it clear he wasn't sorry at all. "The decision has been made. HR will discuss your severance package and the transition process." I was escorted to HR, where I was presented with a severance agreement that offered me 8 weeks of pay in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working at any marketing agency in the Boston area for 2 years. "This non-compete is insane," I protested. "You're firing me and then trying to prevent me from working in my field?" The HR director, a woman named Karen, who I had always thought was reasonably fair, looked uncomfortable. "These are the terms Trevor has directed me to offer. If you don't sign, you'll receive only the minimum severance required by law, which is 2 weeks. I was trapped. I needed the severance money to survive while I looked for a new job, but signing the non-compete would make finding that job nearly impossible. "Can I have a few days to review this with an attorney?" I asked. "You have until the end of the week," Karen replied. I left the office feeling like my world had collapsed. 9 years of hard work, loyalty, and exceptional performance had ended with being fired and pressured to sign away my ability to work in my field. That night, I called my best friend, Alicia Martinez, who worked as a corporate attorney. I explained the situation, the firing, and the severance agreement. "Don't sign anything yet," Alicia said firmly. "Let me look at that non-compete. And Sophia, you need to think about whether you have any documentation of Trevor stealing credit for your work. If he's firing you to cover up the fact that you created the NexCore campaign, and if you have proof of that, you might have leverage." Her words sparked something in me. I had been so focused on being the good employee, the team player, the person who didn't cause problems, that I hadn't thought about protecting myself or documenting the pattern of credit theft. But I did have documentation. I had saved everything, every campaign strategy I had developed, every presentation deck, every email where I had shared ideas with Trevor before he presented them as his own, every piece of client feedback praising work I had done. 9 years of evidence showing that I was the creative engine behind Harmon Creative's success while Trevor took the credit. "I have documentation," I told Alicia. "Lots of it. Everything is saved on my laptop and backed up to my personal cloud storage. Good, Alicia replied. Don't sign that severance agreement. We're going to negotiate better terms, and if Trevor wants to play hardball, we're going to make him regret it. Over the next few days, Alicia reviewed my documentation and the severance agreement. Her assessment was clear. The non-compete is probably unenforceable because it's overly broad and would prevent you from earning a living in your profession. But more importantly, you have extensive evidence that Trevor has been taking credit for your work, which could support claims of wage theft, breach of implied contract, and possibly fraud if he's been using your work to obtain clients under false pretenses. What should I do? I asked. First, we're going to reject the severance offer and negotiate better terms without the non-compete, Alicia explained. Second, you're going to start quietly reaching out to the clients you've worked with, particularly NexCore, and let them know that you're no longer with Harmon Creative. You don't have to badmouth Trevor, but you can make it clear that you were the strategist behind their campaigns, and you're now available for consulting work. Third, you're going to consider whether you want to start your own agency using your existing relationships and your documentation of your work. The idea of starting my own agency was terrifying. I had about $40,000 in savings, no business experience, and no infrastructure. But I also knew that I had the skills, the client relationships, and the track record to make it work. I want to do it, I told Alicia. I want to start my own agency, but I need time to build it before Trevor can replace me on the NexCore account. Then we need to move fast, Alicia replied. The next day, I sent Trevor an email through Alicia rejecting the severance offer and proposing different terms. 12 weeks of severance without the non-compete clause, plus full credit for the campaigns I had developed, including having my name listed as the lead strategist on the agency's case studies and client references. Trevor's response came within hours. It was clear he was not happy. These terms are not acceptable. The original offer stands. Take it or leave it. Alicia sent a response outlining the legal issues with the non-compete. The idea of going public was frightening. Trevor was well connected in the Boston business community. He could damage my reputation, make it harder for me to get clients, potentially even sue me for defamation if I couldn't prove my claims. But I had documentation. Extensive, comprehensive documentation that would prove everything I said about Trevor's pattern of taking credit for other people's work. How would I go public? I asked. There are business journalists who cover the marketing industry, Alicia suggested. You could reach out to them with your story and your documentation. If they verify the information and decide it's newsworthy, they could publish an article exposing Trevor's practices. That would protect you legally because journalists have ways of verifying and presenting information that protect their sources. I thought about it for several days. Going public felt risky and potentially vindictive, but staying silent meant that Trevor would continue taking credit for other people's work, and he would likely continue intimidating former employees who tried to compete with him. I decided to do it. Not for revenge, but for accountability and to protect others from experiencing what I had experienced. I researched business journalists who covered the marketing industry and found a reporter named Jennifer Walsh who worked for a well-regarded business publication and had written several investigative pieces about workplace misconduct and unethical business practices. I reached out to Jennifer through email, explaining that I had information about systematic credit theft and employee exploitation at a Boston marketing agency. I offered to provide documentation but requested anonymity initially until she could verify the information. Jennifer responded within 24 hours, interested in learning more. We set up a phone call where I explained the situation. 9 years of working at Harmon Creative, Trevor systematically taking credit for work I and other employees had done, being fired after questioning this practice, and now being threatened with a bogus lawsuit for starting my own business. Do you have documentation of all this? Jennifer asked. Extensive documentation, I replied. Strategy documents I created, email exchanges showing Trevor taking my ideas, client feedback praising work I did, internal records showing Trevor presenting my work as his own. I can prove everything I'm telling you. Send me what you have, Jennifer said. I'll review it, and if it checks out, I'd like to interview you on the record and investigate this story further. Over the next week, I sent Jennifer hundreds of pages of documentation, organized by campaign and chronologically showing the pattern of credit theft. I included the NexCore campaign materials, showing that I had developed the entire strategy that Trevor had presented as his own. Jennifer spent 2 weeks reviewing the documentation, interviewing other former Harmon Creative employees who confirmed similar experiences, and apparently reaching out to Trevor for comment. She also spoke with some of my former clients, including Marcus Chen from NexCore, who confirmed that I had been the actual strategist behind their campaign, despite Trevor taking public credit. Then Jennifer called me with an update. Sophia, I've verified everything you told me, and I've also discovered that you're not the only employee Trevor has done this to. I found 3 other former employees who had similar experiences of developing campaigns that Trevor then presented as his own work. And I spoke with several clients who confirmed that Trevor's role was primarily ceremonial, while his staff did the actual strategic work. What happens now? I asked. I'm writing an article for publication next month, Jennifer replied. The piece will detail the pattern of credit theft at Harmon Creative, include your documentation showing specific examples, and include interviews with other former employees and clients. I'll need you to go on the record with your name and your account of what happened. Are you comfortable with that? I hesitated. Going on the record meant putting my name and reputation on the line. Trevor would know I was behind the article. He could retaliate, though Alicia assured me that retaliation against a whistleblower would create even more legal problems for him. I'll do it, I decided. But I want to make clear that this isn't just about me. This is about a pattern of behavior that has affected multiple people and that continues to affect current employees at Harmon Creative. That's exactly the angle I'm taking, Jennifer confirmed. The article was published 6 weeks later with the headline, Boston Marketing Agency CEO Built Reputation on Staff's Stolen Work, Former Employees Allege. It was thoroughly researched, carefully written, and devastating. The article detailed my 9 years at Harmon Creative with specific examples of campaigns I had developed that Trevor had presented as his own work. It included the NexCore campaign as the most prominent example, with documentation showing that I had created the entire strategy and managed the execution while Trevor took credit and used the success to justify his own compensation. But the article also included stories from 3 other former employees who described similar experiences. One former senior strategist described developing a healthcare campaign that Trevor had presented at an industry conference as an example of his innovative thinking, never mentioning that she had created it. Another described being told explicitly that clients want to work with the founder, so we present everything as Trevor's ideas. The article included responses from several former clients confirming that they had worked primarily with staff strategists like me, rather than with Trevor, and that Trevor's role had been largely ceremonial, despite him taking credit publicly for the campaigns. Jennifer had also obtained internal financial documents showing that Trevor had given himself substantial bonuses tied to the success of campaigns that other employees had actually created. The article noted that Trevor paid himself over $300,000 annually while telling staff that the agency had tight margins and couldn't afford market rate salaries. When Jennifer had contacted Trevor for comment before publication, he had denied everything, claiming that the accusations were coming from disgruntled former employees with an axe to grind, and that he had always properly credited his staff's contributions. But the documentation Jennifer presented in the article made his denials look weak and unconvincing. The article published on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it had been shared hundreds of times on LinkedIn and Twitter, with marketing professionals commenting on the story, and some sharing their own experiences with similar credit theft dynamics at other agencies. By Thursday, several current Harmon Creative clients were publicly stating that they were reviewing their relationships with the agency. One client posted on LinkedIn that they had been misled about who was actually doing the strategic work and were evaluating whether to continue the relationship. By Friday, 2 senior strategists at Harmon Creative had resigned, posting their resignations publicly and stating that they could no longer work for an agency that didn't value their contributions. The impact on Trevor and Harmon Creative was immediate and severe. The agency's reputation, which Trevor had carefully built over years by taking credit for other people's work, collapsed in a matter of days. I watched all of this unfold with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. I had told my story to expose unethical practices and hold Trevor accountable. I hadn't fully anticipated how devastating the article would be to his career and his business, but I also didn't feel guilty. Trevor had built his entire professional reputation on stolen work. He had exploited talented employees for years, taking credit for their creativity while paying them below market rate. He had fired me for questioning this practice, and then tried to intimidate me into giving up my own business. The consequences he was facing were the direct result of his own unethical behavior finally being exposed. Trevor tried to control the damage. He issued a public statement claiming that the article had misrepresented his role and that he had always valued and credited his team's contributions. He claimed that the former employees quoted in the article were motivated by resentment and competition. But his statement only made things worse. Current and former employees began sharing their own stories on social media, contradicting Trevor's claims and providing additional examples of his credit theft. The hashtag Boston Marketing Truth began trending locally as more people shared experiences of working at agencies where leadership took credit for staff work. Within 2 weeks of the article's publication, Harmon Creative had lost 4 major clients, including one that specifically stated they were moving their business to my agency because they wanted to work with the actual strategist who had been doing the work all along. 3 more senior staff members resigned, with one posting a detailed thread on Twitter describing how Trevor had presented her campaign at an industry event without mentioning her name or contribution. The agency that Trevor had built over 15 years was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. About 3 weeks after the article published, Trevor's attorney contacted Alicia to drop the cease and desist threats. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a terse letter stating that they would not be pursuing legal action regarding my business or my former clients. He knows he can't win, Alicia explained. The article exposed everything, and trying to sue you now would just generate more negative attention and give you a platform to present even more evidence of his credit theft in court. I felt relief that the legal threats were over, but I also felt something deeper, a sense of freedom and empowerment that came from having stood up for myself and held Trevor accountable. My own business, Reynolds Strategy Group, was thriving. The publicity from the article had actually helped me attract new clients who were impressed by my willingness to expose unethical practices and who wanted to work with someone who valued integrity. Within 6 months of the article's publication, I had grown my client roster to 8 companies with total contracted revenue of over $900,000. I hired my first employee, a talented junior strategist who had been one of the people to resign from Harmon Creative after the article published. I want to work somewhere that actually values my contributions, she told me during her interview. You've built exactly the kind of agency I want to be part of. I also hired a part-time operations manager to handle administrative work, and I was in discussions with 2 other former Harmon Creative employees about joining Reynolds Strategy Group. The business was growing faster than I had anticipated, and I was having to learn quickly about managing staff, handling increased financial complexity, and scaling operations. But it was exciting and fulfilling in ways that working at Harmon Creative had never been. 8 months after leaving Harmon Creative, I was invited to speak on a panel at a marketing industry conference about ethical practices in agency work and the importance of proper credit attribution. The invitation felt like a full circle moment, standing on a stage discussing the very issues that had defined my career struggle. During my panel remarks, I talked about the importance of documentation, of knowing your worth, and of being willing to walk away from situations where your contributions aren't valued. For 9 years, I accepted a dynamic where my boss took credit for my work, I told the audience. I told myself it was normal, that this was just how agencies operated, that I should be grateful for the opportunity. But that acceptance came at a cost to my career, my compensation, and my sense of self-worth. When I finally stood up for myself, I lost my job. But I also gained something more valuable: the freedom to build something based on my actual work and my actual values. The panel was well received, and afterward several people approached me to share their own experiences with credit theft and to thank me for speaking publicly about the issue. One woman told me, "I've been in a similar situation for 5 years. Watching what you did, seeing that you built a successful business after leaving, gives me the courage to make a change." "You can do it," I assured her. "Document everything, know your worth, and don't be afraid to leave situations that don't value you." Around the same time as the conference, I learned through industry contacts that Trevor Harmon had been forced to resign as CEO of Harmon Creative. The board of directors, responding to the loss of clients and staff resignations, had apparently decided that Trevor's leadership was no longer tenable. The agency itself was being restructured and rebranded under new leadership, trying to distance itself from Trevor's reputation and rebuild trust with clients and employees. Trevor, according to industry gossip, was having trouble finding new opportunities. The article had damaged his reputation so thoroughly that agencies and companies were reluctant to hire someone with his track record of taking credit for other people's work. I felt a complicated mix of emotions learning about Trevor's downfall. Part of me felt satisfaction that he was facing consequences for years of unethical behavior. But another part of me just felt sad that it had come to this, that his dishonesty and ego had destroyed the business he had built and hurt so many people along the way. But mostly, I felt grateful that I had found the courage to expose what he had done, and that I had built something better than what he had stolen from me. 1 year after leaving Harmon Creative, Reynolds' strategy group had grown to 12 employees with annual revenue projected at $2.3 million. We had won several industry awards for our campaigns, and we were being recognized as one of the fastest-growing marketing agencies in New England. I had also become something of an advocate in the marketing industry for proper credit attribution and ethical agency practices. I wrote articles about the importance of recognizing staff contributions. I spoke at conferences about building inclusive agency cultures, and I mentored young strategists who were navigating similar challenges to what I had experienced. The business success was gratifying, but what meant more to me was the culture I was building at Reynolds Strategy Group. Every employee was properly credited for their work in client presentations and case studies. Compensation was transparent and tied to actual contributions rather than to positional hierarchy, and everyone understood that taking credit for someone else's work was not just discouraged, but would be grounds for immediate termination. "This is what an agency should be," one of my employees told me during a team meeting. "Everyone's contributions are valued, credit is given where it's due, and we succeed together rather than having leadership take credit for our work." That was exactly the agency I had wanted to build, and seeing it actually function that way was deeply satisfying. 2 years after the article exposing Trevor was published, I received an unexpected message. It was from Trevor himself, sent through LinkedIn. The message was brief. "Sophia, I know we haven't spoken since everything happened. I wanted you to know that I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my behavior and the way I treated you and other employees. You were right about everything in that article. I did take credit for your work, and I did build my reputation on stolen ideas. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for what I did, and that I respect what you've built with your own agency. You deserved better, and I should have given you proper credit and recognition." I read the message several times, trying to determine if it was genuine or if this was another manipulation. The Trevor I had known would never have admitted wrongdoing so directly, but whether or not the apology was sincere, it didn't change anything. I had moved on from Trevor and Harmon Creative. I had built something successful and meaningful based on my own work and my own values. His apology, if that's what it was, came too late to matter. I didn't respond to the message. There was nothing left to say to Trevor. Our professional relationship had ended when he fired me for questioning his credit theft, and the article had ended any possibility of personal reconciliation. Instead, I focused on what I had built and where I was going. Reynolds' strategy group continued to grow, taking on more ambitious projects and expanding into new market segments. We won a major contract with a Fortune 500 company that had read about our agency's commitment to ethical practices and wanted to work with a firm that aligned with their values. I also started mentoring young women in marketing through a formal program I established, helping them navigate the challenges of building careers in an industry that still had significant issues with credit attribution and gender dynamics. "Your story gave me permission to value my own work," one of my mentees told me. "I was accepting credit theft because I thought that was just how things worked. But after hearing what you went through and how you fought back, I realized I could do the same." 3 years after leaving Harmon Creative, Reynolds Strategy Group was approaching $5 million in annual revenue with a team of 25 employees. We had become one of the most respected marketing agencies in the region, known not just for excellent work, but for ethical practices and inclusive culture. I was invited to speak at my alma mater's business school about entrepreneurship and building values-driven businesses. Standing in front of students who reminded me of my younger self, I told them my story about spending 9 years having my work stolen, being fired when I questioned it, and building a successful business from that devastating experience. The hardest thing I ever did professionally was walking away from a job where I was good at the work but undervalued as a person, I told the students. I spent 9 years accepting credit theft because I was afraid of losing my job and starting over. When Trevor finally fired me, I was devastated. But that firing was actually a gift because it forced me to stop accepting mistreatment and start building something based on my actual worth. I shared the process of gathering evidence, going public with the story, and building Reynolds Strategy Group from nothing. I talked about the fears I had faced, the risks I had taken, and the satisfaction of proving that I could succeed on my own terms. The best revenge against people who undervalue you isn't destroying them, I concluded. It's building something so successful, so undeniably excellent, that their theft and their dismissal of you becomes irrelevant. It's proving through your achievements that you were always the talented one. They were just too ego-driven or threatened to acknowledge it. The students gave me a standing ovation, and several approached me afterward to share their own experiences with having work stolen or contributions minimized. One student asked, "Do you regret going public with the article? It seems like that could have damaged your reputation or made it harder to build your business." I was afraid of that at the time, I admitted. But it turned out that being willing to expose unethical practices actually enhanced my reputation. Clients wanted to work with someone who had integrity and who would stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. And other talented professionals wanted to work for an agency that was built on values rather than ego. 4 years after the article exposing Trevor was published, I stood in the new office space that Reynolds Strategy Group had just moved into. A beautiful modern space in downtown Boston that could accommodate our growing team. We had just won Agency of the Year from a major industry publication, recognition based on both our campaign work and our agency culture. Looking around at the office, at my team of talented professionals who were all properly credited and valued for their contributions, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Trevor had tried to destroy my career by firing me and threatening legal action. Instead, his actions had forced me to build something better than anything I could have created while working for him. His attempt to steal credit one final time with the NexCore campaign had backfired spectacularly. The client had chosen to work with me instead, becoming the foundation client for my agency, and the documentation I had gathered of his credit theft had enabled me to expose his unethical practices and hold him accountable. Harmon Creative, the agency Trevor had built over 15 years, had eventually been sold to a larger firm after losing too many clients and key employees. Trevor himself had left the marketing industry entirely, according to industry gossip, working in an unrelated field where his tarnished reputation couldn't follow him. Meanwhile, Reynolds' strategy group was thriving, built on a foundation of integrity, proper credit attribution, and genuine respect for everyone's contributions. That was the real victory. Not Trevor's downfall, though there was some satisfaction in seeing him face consequences for his behavior. The real victory was building an agency that operated the way I had always believed agencies should operate, where talented people were valued and credited and compensated fairly. 5 years after leaving Harmon Creative, I was featured in a major business magazine's profile of successful entrepreneurs who had overcome workplace adversity. The article detailed my story of spending 9 years having my work stolen, being fired when I questioned it, and building a multi-million-dollar agency that was now outperforming the company that had fired me. The most common question I get is whether I'm glad Trevor fired me, I told the journalist. The honest answer is yes. Being fired was devastating at the time, but it freed me from a toxic situation where I was never going to get proper recognition or compensation. It forced me to bet on myself and build something based on my actual talents, rather than continuing to let someone else take credit for my work. The journalist asked what advice I would give to others in similar situations of having their work stolen or their contributions minimized. Document everything, I replied without hesitation. Keep copies of your work, your emails, your accomplishments, not because you're planning to leave or sue, but because you need to be able to prove your contributions if they're ever questioned or stolen. And know your worth. Don't accept being undervalued just because it's comfortable or because you're afraid of starting over. You have more options and more power than you think. The article generated significant attention, and I received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own experiences with credit theft and workplace exploitation. Many thanked me for speaking publicly and for showing that it was possible to fight back and succeed. One message particularly stood out. It was from Julia Chen, my former supervisor at Harmon Creative, who had left years before me. "Sophia, I'm so proud of what you've built," Julia wrote. "I should have fought back when Trevor was stealing my work, but I just left quietly and tried to move on. You had the courage to expose what he was doing and hold him accountable. You didn't just save yourself, you probably saved countless future employees from experiencing what we went through. Thank you." Reading Julia's message, I realized that going public with Trevor's credit theft hadn't just been about my own career or revenge. It had been about accountability, about changing industry practices, about making it harder for other Trevor Harmons to build careers on stolen work. That larger impact, that contribution to changing workplace culture beyond just my own situation, meant more to me than any business success or personal vindication. As I reflected on the 5 years since leaving Harmon Creative, I thought about everything I had learned. I had learned that accepting mistreatment doesn't make it stop. It just teaches people that they can continue mistreating you. I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's scary and risky, is better than staying silent and accepting undervaluation. I had learned that documentation and evidence are powerful tools when confronting unethical behavior. And I had learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, like being fired, can actually be the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you, like building your own successful business. But most importantly, I had learned that success built on your own merit and your own values is infinitely more satisfying than success achieved by stealing credit from others. Trevor had looked successful for years, but his success was hollow and ultimately unsustainable because it was built on lies and theft. The success I had built with Reynolds' strategy group was real and lasting because it was based on genuine talent, hard work, and integrity. 6 years after Trevor fired me, Reynolds' strategy group reached $10 million in annual revenue with 50 employees across 2 office locations. We had become one of the top marketing agencies in New England, consistently winning industry awards and attracting top talent who wanted to work in an ethical, values-driven environment. I had also published a book about my experience called Stolen Credit: How to Recognize, Document, and Fight Back Against Workplace Exploitation. The book combined my personal story with practical advice for employees dealing with credit theft, research on the prevalence of the problem in creative industries, and strategies for building workplace cultures that properly valued everyone's contributions. The book became a bestseller in the business category, and I was invited to speak at companies and conferences around the country about workplace ethics and proper attribution. Standing on stages discussing these issues, sharing my story with thousands of people, I often thought about that moment 6 years earlier when Trevor had fired me and I had felt like my career was over. I had been devastated then, convinced that I would never recover professionally from being fired after 9 years of loyal service. But that devastation had been the beginning of something better. Being fired had forced me to stop accepting mistreatment and start building something based on my own worth. Trevor's theft had been exposed, his reputation had been destroyed, and his agency had collapsed. Meanwhile, I had built something successful and meaningful that helped others while also providing me with the recognition and compensation I had always deserved. That was the real revenge, not destroying Trevor, though his downfall had been a natural consequence of his unethical behavior being exposed. The real revenge was succeeding so completely, building something so much better than what he had stolen, that his attempt to take credit for my work became just a footnote in my success story, rather than the defining moment of my career. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own workplace, if you have a boss or colleague who takes credit for your work, if you're being undervalued and underpaid despite your contributions, I want you to know that you have more power than you think. Document everything. Know your worth. Don't be afraid to walk away from situations that don't value you. And trust that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, like being fired or betrayed, can be the catalyst for building something better. Trevor Harmon tried to steal my career by taking credit for my work and firing me when I questioned it. He thought he could intimidate me into giving up by threatening bogus lawsuits. He underestimated me, just like he had underestimated me for 9 years while I was creating the campaigns that built his reputation. His underestimation was his biggest mistake, because while he was busy taking credit and building his hollow reputation, I was documenting everything, building my skills, and establishing client relationships. When he finally fired me, I had everything I needed to expose his fraud and build my own successful agency. The overlooked employee became the successful entrepreneur. The credit thief became the disgraced former CEO. And the agency built on stolen work collapsed, while the agency built on integrity and genuine talent thrived. That's not just my story. That's a template for anyone dealing with workplace exploitation and credit theft. You can fight back. You can expose unethical practices. You can build something better. And you can succeed on your own terms rather than accepting someone else's undervaluation. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might be experiencing credit theft or workplace exploitation. Drop a comment about your own experiences with bosses or colleagues taking credit for your work, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and building success through integrity rather than theft. Remember, documentation is your most powerful tool. Your worth isn't determined by whether someone else recognizes it, and sometimes the best thing that can happen is being forced to leave a situation where you were never going to be properly valued. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who's dealing with a boss who steals credit, who's being undervalued despite exceptional work, or who's wondering if they have the courage to walk away and build something of their own. You do have that courage. Document everything. Know your worth. And trust that you can build something better than what they're stealing from you. It took time, it took risk, and it took the willingness to expose unethical practices, even when it was scary. But justice was served, success was achieved, and I built a career I can be genuinely proud of based on my own work and my own values, rather than on stolen credit and hollow reputation. The employee whose work was stolen became the CEO of a thriving agency. The boss who built his career on theft lost everything. And the story that began with devastation and betrayal ended with success, integrity, and the satisfaction of proving that genuine talent will always triumph over stolen credit.